So Sharon Goldberg is an integrative internal medicine physician. She's in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with clinical experience treating environmental illness, including microwave syndrome, and she'll explain what that is. She's one of a small but growing number of physicians who've completed advanced electromagnetic radiation coursework with the Institute for Building Biology and Ecology and has technical experience with home EMR assessment and remediation. Her background includes 15 years as an academic hospital medicine physician and medical educator responsible for the training of medical students and resident physicians, and she's assistant professor at New York City's Mount Sinai Hospital, Beth Israel Medical Center, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She's board certified in internal medicine since 2000 and American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine diplomat since 2012. She's also has additional training in tropical medicine and hygiene from, excuse my mispronunciation of this Spanish word, Gorgas Memorial Institute in Lima, Peru. Dr. Goldberg's clinical interests include dietary, lifestyle, and environmental modifications in the setting of complex chronic disease. She's co-authored publications in the fields of dietary supplementation, autonomic nervous system assessment, and nutritional epidemiology. Her current research interests include examining the effects of home and electromagnetic field remediation on health outcomes. So, Dr. Goldberg, come on up. Let me get your slides up. Okay. It'll just take me a second. You can go ahead and say hello to everybody and why you were so brave to agree to do this.
Well, thank you for that long introduction. I should have made it shorter. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here speaking to in front of a medical audience about health effects of electromagnetic fields. And I am so excited to learn from all the expert faculty that Lynn has assembled here, and Lisa. So thanks for being here. I guess I want to take a minute to thank the organizers of the conference for all of their hard work and for putting it together, and especially can I have the regular view, just the full screen? Okay. And to thank Dr. Ray for his vision and dreaming this up.
Yeah, really. I'm going to have to unplug for just a second.
Okay. And I guess since we're just figuring out things logistically, I'll let you know I'm not a Mac user. I think this will be fine.
It's okay.
Well, I'm going to move it. Great.
If that works. It's the HDMI cable that I think.
Okay. I just hit the space bar, and that's it. Right, arrows. Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Lynn. Good morning again. All right. So, you heard a bit about me. So, I tried to put together an introductory talk because I thought that we needed everyone on the same page. So, essentially, this is two talks. Part one is this brief introduction to electromagnetics geared towards clinicians. And part two is going to be the actual talk on electromagnetic fields and health. So we're going to talk a bit about current health trends. We're going to talk about oxidative stress, which is a key EMF effect that I wanted to talk about more in depth. And then we're going to review selected cardiometabolic and neurologic effects of electromagnetic fields. So I'm going to start with, let me just fix this mic. What I think is really one of the most important messages that I have for you today, which is this. So the biological effects of electromagnetic fields overlap with the mechanisms of chronic disease that we see today. So this does not mean, and I want to be clear, I'm not saying that electromagnetic fields are the cause of the epidemics that I'm going to be presenting today. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that this current mindset that we have, particularly in medicine, of thinking that the electromagnetic environment is irrelevant to health has to change, because there's so much science to show that this is simply not the case. So that's really I think that's my biggest take-home message. And so this talk is about really the intersection of the two circles that you see in the Venn diagram, to be thinking about that more. So what are the biological effects of electromagnetic fields? I picked these 6 because they're clinically relevant, and this talk is really going to zero in on oxidative stress and a bit about mitochondrial damage. So why is it important to talk about this now? So the US population is becoming unsustainably ill, and that's both physically and mentally. We have unprecedented levels of chronic disease, and they're occurring at younger ages. And the third reason is the one that I think is the most important one, which is that our current trends in healthcare spending are completely unsustainable. So we have to do something to reverse these trends, or at least think differently about other ways of addressing our public health emergencies or urgent situation. So this is part 1, this is a very brief overview of electromagnetics, what I think clinicians should know. So what is current? Current is the movement of charge or electrons. And here you've got an example of a conductor, copper. And the way that they teach it in building biology is, and to think about it is, it's convenient. If you push on an electron at one end of this lattice of copper atoms, an electron will come out at the other end, okay? And the reason this happens, if you remember, electrons are very small, very light, and they live in the periphery of an atom, and they're orbiting around the outside. So they can easily be dislodged. So we have 2 different kinds of current that we encounter in our lives, all right? You have direct current and you have alternating current. And the reason why this is pertinent for medicine, for science, is that, so direct current is the current that comes out of a battery. And if you go back to that copper lattice that I just showed you, the electrons are going in one direction only, okay? And you've got this static charge and the force is constant. But if you think about what the kind of electricity we have in our homes, it's alternating current. So alternating current is going back, and the electrons are going back and forth 60 times every second. So we may not feel this. Some people here, some people do. We may not be aware of it, but our cells are affected by this. So, oh, my microphone just fell. Let's see if I can fix this. Maybe it needs to be tighter. Okay. So the bottom line, the take home, is that alternating current is much more biologically active than direct current for that reason of the back and forth. So this is the electromagnetic spectrum that I know everyone has seen this. And we've all been taught that at the right end of the spectrum, you've got ionizing radiation. That's the bad kind of radiation. That's dangerous. But we've also been taught that non-ionizing radiation at the left end of the spectrum, well, that's okay. But that's not what the science says. So what I would like you to take away from this slide is that all of the man-made electromagnetic fields are biologically active. So and I think a lot of people in medicine or a lot of patients, when they think about electromagnetic fields, they're thinking about wireless. And they're forgetting about the other frequencies, the lower frequencies that are towards the left end of this picture, okay? So it's also the lower frequencies. So keep that in mind. And this talk is going to zero in on the area inside the oval in the non-ionizing portion. Why is this not moving? Okay, so in medicine, we always think, well, does this change management? Why should we care about EMFs? So really the reason is that unlike, for instance, air pollution, if you live in a city, which you can't really change, you can filter the air, but you can't change the air that you're breathing, you have total control over the choices, the devices you choose to use in your home, over your wiring, if there are errors. There's a lot of control. And so these electromagnetic fields that building biologists focus on are modifiable. And that's why it's important for clinicians to care about this. And these are the 4 that you should know. You're going to have a whole lecture about this, so this is very quick not review, but just a very quick overview. So this is to give you a visual of what I mean when we talk about lower frequency targets for remediation. There are 2 kinds: ELF, extremely low frequency, which would be the electric and magnetic fields, and then VLF is what we consider dirty electricity or electromagnetic interference. And this is just so you can see where it is on the electromagnetic spectrum. So here's an example of a magnetic field. And this was, this is my blender. I took a video of it. So you can see with the blender off, I'm measuring, this is the ambient level of my house. It's 0.22 milligauss, which is not bad for a home. When the blender went on, the level exceeds 200 milligauss, which is extremely high. So let me... So, and I also measured my hair dryer. I don't do this for fun. I did it for the talk because I just wanted to have some kind of a visual. So I measured my hair dryer and it was the same. It was over 200 and the meter only goes up to 200. So I really don't know how much of a magnetic field this is. It's very high though. So the reason I'm showing you this is, and you may be thinking like, well, does this mean my patients can't make smoothies, especially the sensitive ones? No, it doesn't mean that they can't make smoothies, but it does mean that if you're seeing someone with a neurodegenerative condition like Alzheimer's or MS or ALS, and they happen to work as a hairdresser using a blow dryer all day long, or they work at Starbucks operating a blender, this may be a really big deal because there's a lot of research showing that chronic magnetic field exposure is linked with neurodegeneration. Okay, so just a visual here on the higher frequency remediation targets. And this oval isn't perfect. It doesn't capture all of the radio frequency microwave. This just shows you the telecommunications spectrum of radio frequency. Okay, so now you know where to place it on the electromagnetic spectrum. And you're going to get more on this. Don't worry if it's all new to you. So here's an example of radio frequency radiation. And this is, I measured this. This is my patient's husband's car, and she's extremely EMF reactive and has a lot of cardiovascular disease. And I was fortunate enough to have Michael Schwabe, a building biologist who is very knowledgeable in dirty electricity, come and do an evaluation on their house. So this was during that evaluation. The bottom line of the slide is that RF doesn't always come from inside of the house. Now it's coming from cars. And this car was the largest source of radio frequency, of wireless radiation in this home. So, oh, and I guess before I play the video, I'll tell you that the car wasn't even turned on, and we measured 150,000 microwatts per meter squared, which is extremely high. And when the car went on, there were multiple sources of RF, of radio frequency. And it was so high that it went off. I wasn't able to measure with my meter. It was off. It exceeded the detection capacity of the meter. So I'll play this video for you. Okay. All right. So just some general principles about population effects. Population exposure to EMFs has been increasing gradually since we electrified our homes in the mid-1900s. And because the entire population is getting exposed to multiple frequencies, so high frequency and low frequency, it's very hard to detect measurable effects if you're trying to measure the effect of one frequency or one particular type of a device like a cell phone or a cordless phone, because you have all these overlapping frequencies that people are exposed to. So in my opinion, the older research is very important because you have fewer confounders, especially in the higher frequencies. So a few more general principles about biological effects. The duration of exposure is very important, and I'm talking about years. This is especially true in children who now in school have the laptop. It's not just the Wi-Fi. They've got the laptops, which are giving electric fields and magnetic fields, which you'll see later in the talk. Second general principle, that acute effects are often very different from chronic effects. So you can't really extrapolate the results of a short-term study to chronic exposure. Third, there are very clear gender differences in EMF reactivity. Women are much more reactive than men, and this is particularly true with electric shock safety criteria. The amount of current that's considered safe for a woman is lower than that for a man. And finally, pulsed RF is more biologically active than continuous wave. You're going to get a lot of this, so don't worry if it's all new. I'm going to skip that. So part 2, health trends and EMF bioeffects. So in the US, we have really great data on commercially insured Americans. So Blue Cross Blue Shield has this wonderful website and program. It's called the Health of America Reports. I'm going to talk a bit about their most recent report, which is about the health of millennials. So this is called the Blue Cross Blue Shield Millennial Health Study. Anyone can access this. It's for a lay audience. They studied 55 million commercially insured Americans. They're millennials, so they were born between 1981 and 1996. And what they found was that a major decline in the health of this generation begins at age 27. And what you're looking at, so on the y-axis is something called the Blue Cross Blue Shield Health Index, which basically means a score of 100 means optimal health. And as the number gets lower, the health gets poorer. And here's what they found. It's really scary. So they're looking, you've got the top 10 conditions that affected millennial health here, ranked by adverse health impact. And they're comparing the prevalence in 2014 with the prevalence of the same conditions in 2017. And I've circled some of the largest increases. So there was a 31% increase in major depression, 29% increase in hyperactivity, and a 22% increase in diabetes. And if you'll see also psychosis and hypertension increased significantly. And this is just in a 3-year period. I'm sure some of you are thinking, like I did, well, maybe this is just some kind of a blip in the data and it doesn't really mean anything, but actually it's part of a larger trend, which is quite disturbing. So this comes from, it's a different Blue Cross Blue Shield report. This is their report on major depression. So this is the rate of change for major depression diagnosis, and they're looking at 2013 versus 2016. And this is all age groups. And what you can see is that the younger the age group that you examine, the greater the increase in rate of change for major depression. So the younger people are being hit really hard. And it's not just major depression that's rising in the United States. We have a suicide epidemic. And this is data from the CDC that they looked at suicide rates from 1999 to 2016, and they found that 25 states had suicide rate increases greater than 30%. And this is like an official epidemic. So what does this have to do with electromagnetic fields? I am going to talk about electromagnetic fields. So people are busy. If you have time to read only one paper about EMFs and neuropsychiatric disease, this is the paper that I recommend. So this is a 2016 paper by Martin Paul. Microwave frequency electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. And this is a great paper because it's short. I know that sounds horrible, but people are busy. It's a short paper. It's got a summary table with 24 peer-reviewed papers on EMF-associated neuropsychiatric effects. And it's really clear and concise documentation of that EMF exposure was associated with a wide variety of neuropsychiatric symptoms. He also goes into mechanisms and talks about the effect that voltage-gated calcium channels have a near universal role in the release of neurotransmitters and hormones by neuroendocrine cells. Also, the EMFs act via downstream voltage-gated calcium channels, and they increase intracellular calcium, have effects on signaling with nitric oxide, and also increase reactive oxygen species. So we have other epidemics now in the US, and one of them is stroke in the young. So stroke occurring at age really below 45. Some people consider it below 65. But this is there's a lot of data on this. So George et al. In 2017 reviewed 2 large data sets with a combined N of close to 800,000 hospitalizations. And what they found was a significant increase in acute ischemic stroke hospitalization rates for both men and women. But for the men, the rates of acute ischemic stroke nearly doubled. And these are from the age groups 18 to 34 and 35 to 44. While at the same time, the stroke rates for older adults did not change. So, and this is again, it's not an isolated trend or one paper. This data is being, you can see similar things happening in, there are studies from other countries. So it's not just one paper. So stroke is like the new normal or something. We've got, support groups for people who, for stroke in the young. And there's even a magazine. I was shocked to see this called Stroke Smart. So shocking. And and the etiology, the reason for ischemic stroke in the young, it's cryptogenic in up to 50% of the patients, so they don't know what the cause is. So I'm sure some of you are wondering, why am I talking about mental illness and stroke together? Why did I lump them together? There is actually a reason, and I'm sorry, the print, I don't know if you can read what's at the top of this slide. The print is small. But this is from a great paper published in 2013 by Popa Wagner et al. It's about reactive oxygen species in brain disease. So what the point of this slide is that if you remember back to the Blue Cross Blue Shield table, the conditions that are skyrocketing, you've got 3 of them here on the slide. So ADHD, depression, schizophrenia, i.e. psychosis, and stroke. So the shared mechanism between mental illness, stroke, and dementia is oxidative stress. And to quote from the article, the brain is especially susceptible to reactive oxygen species. It is a major metabolizer of oxygen, yet has relatively feeble protective antioxidant mechanisms. So it's fascinating to think that these conditions share a common mechanism. So what does this have to do with EMF? Well, we understand now that radio frequency radiation causes oxidative stress. And this is again, if you have time to read only one paper about oxidative stress and radio frequency radiation, this is the paper that I recommend. So it's a 2016 paper by Yakimenko. I hope I pronounced the name right. And this is a review of 100 available peer-reviewed studies of oxidative effects of low-intensity radio frequency radiation. 93 out of 100 of these studies confirm that RF induces oxidative effects in biological systems. And the conclusion was that low-intensity RF is an oxidative agent for living cells that has a high pathogenic potential. So oxidative stress, this term gets thrown around a lot and we talk about it a lot, but what does it mean for patients? It means all the bad stuff. And this is from a paper published almost 20 years ago that is a great introduction to oxidative stress if you want to learn more about it, by McCord. So, from the quote from this paper, he said, oxidative stress is now thought to make a significant contribution to all inflammatory diseases. So I won't go through this list, but you can see oxidative stress is just one of those mechanisms that really is associated with a lot of badness, medically speaking. Well, I'm going to give you some examples, you'll see. So a little bit more. So to understand oxidative stress, we have to talk about oxygen and understand it a little bit more. So oxygen, reactive oxygen species play a vital role in human physiology. So we need it for cellular signaling, we need it for pathogen defense, and most importantly, we need it for ATP production. So we rely on oxygen in order to make ATP. And it's surprising when you hear that, because we're so dependent on oxygen, surprising to hear that 98% of the oxygen that we metabolize is metabolized through only one enzyme, and it's cytochrome oxidase in the mitochondria. So cytochrome oxidase has to handle oxygen very carefully, and it has to simultaneously transfer 4 electrons to oxygen, producing 2 water molecules. Because if it transfers any less than 4 at once, it produces reactive oxygen species, which will damage the surrounding tissue if they're not contained. And I wanted to just remind everyone of the definition of a free radical is a molecule that contains a single unpaired electron. All right? Most molecules in the body are stable. They're not radicals. So the point is that when you get a reaction of a radical with a non-radical, it sets off this chain reaction which generates new radicals. And so then these radicals go around and they're whatever they bump into, they damage because they're seeking to gain an electron for stability. So if they bump into a protein, into a fat, into DNA, they can damage it. All right? So that's why they need to be controlled by our antioxidant defense system. And I have a slide to show you that in a sec. So there are many causes of oxidative stress. It's not just electromagnetic fields. Ionizing radiation, chemicals, products of combustion, stress, lots of causes. But again, the reason why we're thinking about EMFs is that EMFs, to a certain extent, are modifiable. So that is important. And I wasn't able to find a good graphic on oxidative stress, but I think this is pretty good to give you a sense of why it's so hard to understand, really. So what we're looking at in this table, on the left, you've got reactive oxygen species, and you can see there are lots of different kinds of reactive oxygen species. And on the right, you've got the antioxidant defense mechanisms. So you've got enzymes that do this work and non-enzymes, which are a lot of vitamins. And this comes from a good paper about the role of oxidative stress in cardiovascular diseases, if you want more information. So I promised you a bit about the overlap that I was talking about, EMF effects and chronic disease. So here's an example: oxidative stress and cardiovascular disease. We're not going to go through this. This is information. You can look at this if you want more information. But bottom line, this is one of those reactions that we're talking about: nitric oxide and superoxide reacting, and then peroxynite, you get cell damage. That's the bottom line. And they're talking about this in the context of ischemic heart disease, cardiomyopathy, hypertension. And this is a great paper about EMFs as an emerging risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So this was this 2017 paper by Bondara and Weller. And what the bottom line of this paper was there's an increasing proportion of ST elevation MI patients that lack traditional cardiac risk factors. RF is an environmental pollutant with cytotoxic effects. RF generates oxidative stress, which is implicated in CVD, and so cardiovascular disease. And RF may contribute to CVD via oxidative cellular damage. They also go into some examples of great observational data. It's historical observational data about cardiovascular disease and microwave exposure. You can read this on your own. Okay. Second example is oxidative stress and heart failure, and I just want to take a minute to remind you, you're going to hear a lot about the National Toxicology Program cell phone study, and there's a lot of focus on the brain cancer aspect of that study. But I just want you to keep in your minds that they also saw, besides the cardiac tumors, one of the findings was cardiomyopathy of the right ventricle. So that's a really serious thing that we need to be thinking about. And we've got the overlapping mechanisms, like I said, oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction play an important role in heart failure. Okay, so that is the end of the oxidative stress part of the talk. And I promised you a bit about mitochondrial dysfunction. So this is a great article about heart failure. It's called "The Failing Heart and Engine Out of Fuel." And it was published in 2007 by Neubauer. So he says the cardiac metabolism is heavily ATP dependent. The activity of electron transport chain complexes and ATP synthase capacity are reduced in heart failure. So there is not enough ATP available for cardiac myocytes. In this paper, he actually suggests that they need to come up with a drug to improve ATP production, to stimulate oxidative phosphorylation. But the reason I put this in this talk is that we're thinking about, well, what are the lifestyle modifications that we could make to potentially, maybe lowering EMFs could potentially improve ATP production. What does the science say? I've only got one paper to talk about this, but there are others out there. So this is a 2014 paper by Lee and Haru. Extra low frequency magnetic fields alter cancer cells through metabolic restriction. So what they did was they wanted to see the effect of magnetic fields on cancer cells. So they exposed 5 cancer cell lines to magnetic fields, and then they examined them. So the conclusions: the biological effects of magnetic fields are connected to an alteration in the structure of water that impedes the flux of protons in ATP synthase channels. So if you guys just think about this for a second. This is, this is really big if you think about it. It's important. If we can't produce ATP, or we're not producing ATP as well as we should be because we're being exposed to a magnetic field, this has serious implications. Okay, so that's why it's there. And here's another important paper by Dae-Kun Lee in 2012. It's a prospective study of 733 children looking at magnetic fields and the link to the risk of childhood obesity. And the conclusions were prenatal exposure to high magnetic field associated with increased risk of obesity in children. And there was a dose-response relationship. They say maternal exposure to high magnetic fields during pregnancy may be a new and previously unknown factor contributing to the worldwide epidemic of childhood obesity and overweight. So a lot of people think, well, there are no power lines near my house, so I'm fine. I don't have magnetic fields. But, do you use a laptop? Because laptops have magnetic fields. This is my laptop that I measured. I had never done that before. And my laptop was 6.7 milligauss. It was high. It wasn't even plugged in. And then when I measured over the charger on the right, you can see it was 72 milligauss. That's really high. So we're doing this to our kids are using laptops at school, and they're being exposed to magnetic fields from these laptops. So it's not just the Wi-Fi, it's also these other fields. Okay, so changing gears, this is a bit about diabetes and the biological plausibility of a diabetes EMF connection. So the pancreas has poor defenses against oxidative stress. We've just seen that radiofrequency radiation causes oxidative stress. And there's also reason to believe that it interferes with mitochondrial function. Radiofrequency radiation triggers both a cellular stress response in the form of heat shock proteins and a systemic stress response, which we know about it from increased excretion rates of stress hormones, including cortisol, epi, and norepi. And many diabetic complications are associated, are linked with oxidative stress, like diabetic retinopathy and fatty liver and cardiovascular disease. So this is a 1971 Naval Medical Research Institute paper. It's a bibliography of reported effects of microwave and radio frequency radiation. And if you haven't read this document, I recommend that you read it. It's also, the bibliography is long, but the actual list of effects is not that long. And this is what they said about diabetes in 1971. This is the US Navy, okay? They found increase in blood glucose concentration, glycosuria, so sugar in the urine, change in concentration of glycogen in the liver, and altered carbohydrate metabolism. So this was a long time ago, and they were already finding pretty clear diabetogenic effects. So more recent studies. So we got two rat studies here. These are studies of rats being exposed to Wi-Fi, and not for very long periods of time. And I'll just read the conclusions. Wi-Fi leads to hyperglycemia, increased oxidative stress, and impaired insulin secretion. And the second paper was looking at olive leaf extract as a supplement to try and reduce oxidative stress or adverse effects from the Wi-Fi. And they found that RF exposure induced a diabetes-like status. It's concerning. And I just threw this article in here in case you want to read more about oxidative stress and type 2 diabetes pathophysiology. You can see it's very intimately linked with oxidative stress. So diabetes, in the US, the cost of treating diabetes is really breaking the bank. And this shocked me. I'm looking at the, on your right, you can see, so from 2007 to 2017, the cost of treating diabetes doubled, and it went from $116 billion to $237 billion in a 10-year period, which I find really shocking. And this is just something that I stumbled across. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but there is actually a continuous glucose monitoring system now that's wireless, okay? And so you can So you can understand this for a type 1 diabetic, maybe, okay, you can sort of get this. But it turns out that Medicare is actually covering this for type 2 diabetics, okay? So, and it's convenient. You know, you put a sensor on your abdomen and these people don't have to do a finger stick. But this is FDA approved for age 2 and up. It checks glucose up to 288 times a day and sends them wirelessly to the smart device. But I don't think anyone has thought about the science behind this and what's the potential for increased oxidative stress on diabetic complications like retinopathy, cardiovascular disease. It's very concerning. So that's the end of my diabetes part. And we'll talk a little bit about neurologic effects. So this is a great paper that was given to me by Richard Lear. I don't know if he's here. I know that Kim is here. Thank him for me. It's a 1965 German Ford Motor Company report on the CNS effects of microwaves. And these are the findings of the study. Diffuse effects on the autonomic nervous system affecting circulation, respiration, fluid balance, EEG, sleep, and CSF glucose. And this is for people that are interested, this is a very important paper for understanding the variability of EMF effects on humans, and also for understanding the concept that all people are affected by electromagnetic fields. But I don't have time to go into this, but if you're interested, this is a paper that I suggest you read. And I'm gonna have to skip over this slide for the sake of time. But what they're showing here from this paper is that the effect of even the same EMF exposure with the same transmitter and the same dose could be variable in the same patient at different times. And that low dose exposure could increase parasympathetic tone, while just increasing the dose could give you an increase in sympathetic tone. So it's really fascinating stuff in this article if you're interested. Okay, so back to the US Navy report that I mentioned before about diabetes. What do they have to say about neurologic effects? So here's what they knew as of 1971. That microwave radiation is associated with headaches, insomnia and fatigue, EEG changes, memory loss. I'm not going to read all of these, you can see them. But all the mental illness, depression, anxiety, anorexia, dizziness, and hallucinations. It could be psychosis, who knows? So that was 1971. And overview, just other neurologic effects of EMFs that I didn't mention is activation of endogenous opioids that God only knows what are the clinical ramifications of that, but we really need to be looking into that given that we have an epidemic of opioid abuse in this country. So common effects, what I mean by that is, when you remediate a home, and we have so many building biologists here today. I really encourage you to meet them, talk with them, and ask them about, to share some cases with you about effects from home remediation that they've seen. They have very interesting stories to tell. So these common effects are the effects that you see commonly resolve or improve when the EMF environment is improved in a person's home and they lower their exposure. So cognitive impairment, concentration issues, sleep issues, headaches, tinnitus, and an interesting one is behavioral changes in children. I mean, I can't tell you how many stories people have of, lowering the EMFs in the home or getting rid of the smart meter, and the kids fight less or they stop fighting. I'm not making this up. You can't make this stuff up. So just one more military paper about, this is not on sleep, it's another overview paper that comes from the US Air Force, from the Rome Laboratory. And this is looking at the animal studies of sleep effects of microwaves. Animals were aroused from states of deep sleep by irradiation with pulsed RF microwave. So then you wonder, well, why? Maybe this has something to do with the insomnia epidemic that we have here now. I'm going to skip over this slide for the sake of time. And then I have one more neuro slide related to, this is also kind of a biological plausibility slide. It's a summary table that comes from Dr. Paul Haru's. He has an ebook available online that anyone can download for free. And the email address is at the bottom of the slide. So this is essentially a textbook. It's his McGill course on health effects of electromagnetism, and it's fabulous. You can download the whole book. You can print it out. So this is a table from that book, and you can see that the enzyme effects of EMFs are really. It makes sense to see the clinical manifestations when you look at the effects on enzymes. So EMFs modify hydrogen bonds that affect hippocampus, the cholinergic system, and GABA. And there are also structural changes to many enzymes, including acetylcholinesterase. So, it affects learning and wakefulness. So it's not really a surprise that we see the results that we see. So that's pretty much the end of the talk. This is what I would like you to take home today. That number one, all electromagnetic fields have biological effects, and that includes the electricity that powers our homes. Number two, that the biological effects affect everyone, and that's regardless of whether people feel it or not. Number three, the EMF effects are protean, they're variable, they're inconsistent even in the same patient, and can present as a wide variety of symptoms and conditions. And so people will often say, well, what are the effects of EMFs? And this is a very non-scientific answer, but in my experience, seeing patients who have had homes remediated pre and post, really EMF lowering can help or sometimes resolve almost any random symptom in the book. And it is non-scientific, but that's why I encourage you to talk to the building biologists, because they will share these stories with you, and it's fascinating. Number four, oxidative stress and increased reactive oxygen species contribute to all inflammatory diseases. 5, radiofrequency radiation causes oxidative stress. It weakens our antioxidant defense system that would help us combat the oxidative stress. And it also increases a person's susceptibility to environmental toxins, to chemicals. And then a few take-homes about EMF remediation. So I hope that I've made a scientific case for you to consider EMF remediation in the home as a type of therapeutic lifestyle modification for oxidative stress associated conditions. We definitely have the basic science to support this. And if you want to know how to get started, we're very fortunate to have a lot of building biologists here at this meeting, and just talk to them and meet with, you can connect with someone in your area, and the best way to learn is on your own home. And if you can get someone to come to your home and understand what is the effect on your own body by lowering the EMFs in your home, that is a really great way to start. And my last take home is just a clinical caveat. So if you recommend EMF remediation for a patient who's a diabetic on a lot of medication or a hypertensive on a lot of blood pressure medication, you have to let the patient know ahead of time that there may be a really dramatic response with their blood sugar or with their blood pressure. And so you can have hypoglycemic episodes or hypotensive episodes when these stressors are removed from the home or lowered from the home. So you should be prepared for that, okay? So thank you for your attention. I leave you with a quote from a really fabulous book published in 1976 by 2 Polish EMF scientists, Baranski and Cezerski. I hope I'm pronouncing their names right. It's called The Biological Effects of Microwaves. And this is what they had to say in 1976. They said, the problems of microwave bioeffects and health hazards cannot be solved by biologists, physicians, physicists, or electronic engineers working alone. Teamwork is required. It is the author's firm conviction that only an international effort based on broad collaboration, unbiased discussions, and exchange of opinions may bring a satisfactory solution. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for being here and being a part of this collaborative effort. Thank you.